This is At the Bottom of the Sea of Troubles by Lucy Ribchester. When I think of him, it starts with his shoes. Italian leather, I can tell from the tongues. He must have been friends with a sailor to have acquired them, because I can also tell by the way he holds his legs that he is horseman rather than seafarer. He wears black stockings. His breeches are shorter than the fashion, but they suit him. As does the collar, stiff, square, lovely white, and gaping as if he has ridden carelessly through some forest, which he may well have done for all I know. I always remember the mischief in his face as he stood staring through the menagerie bars at a long-necked, thick-lashed giraffe, like he could just get on its back and spur it away. A poet, then. The way he looked at ships, at the section of the Thames that broadened. It was with a hunger that I haven't seen in any sailor. Is it yours? I thought for a moment he meant the beast and was mocking me, but when he didn't laugh, I saw he was pointing at the shop. How I could have taken his money for that great-necked animal of Africa and run. And sometimes, in my more bitter moments, I wish I had. Then at least I'd have a shilling to show in return for the gifts I've given him. When we're adrift in the nightless Arctic, I think of the chill on the first night, when he made us sit at an outside table in the beer garden so that he could watch the ships. Back then, I was a boy to him. He paid more attention to the skippers, asked them about light and coastline and birds. "Aye, asses," one of them said, of the baby hawks we carried back from Arabia to sell to Falkners. He liked the word, little asses. He said it over and over. I saw his currency then. When would I have time to love him? We're not there in the docks where the ships gave off a stink of whaleskin and tar and men too long alone. Not in the liberties where we walked under the Ludgate, or in the sorry gaze of pitched traitors' heads stuck on spikes. Devils watching. And then I was at sea once more, in my slops and my own Italian shoes I'd bartered for a basket of English wool. When he waved me goodbye after that first meeting, he said, "How can you sail so uncertain into the night? Into sea creatures, renegados, pirates?" I tried to disguise a shiver as a shrug and said, half looking over my shoulder at a boisterous group of men trying on masks, "Let he that hath the steerage of my course direct my sail." I looked up to God, just as one of the men from the fiesta slapped another on the shoulder and shouted, "On, lusty gentleman!" The next time I saw my poet, I wasn't even off the bow of the ship. He seemed a fixture there at the Wapping docks, staring like he was cast in black iron. Painted marble man. This way, I later learned, he soaked everything in. He gave away nothing, kept it all, turned it into precious words to sell. I wondered if he ever slept, or where his chambers were, or when he rehearsed the plays he spoke so shyly of. Time stands still when you snatch gusts of it in other countries. Their time, their different way of walking, of talking, smelling. The rest spent on a blank sea-grey page, a mute clock with nothing but the edge of the earth on all sides. So you wonder how it is that people move on back home. His ruff was flashier this time. Square and bright as a pearl, and the corners high, almost reaching into the ginger fleece of his beard. The sailors, of course, don't follow fashions. They change when it pleases them. Something Spanish today, black lace, a gaudy pin, a crucifix to be worn near the heart. Or German trousers, looser, covering to the knees. The sailors don't follow fashions because we bring the fashions. Oh, he recognized me. I knew from his eyes. I'm parched, I said. It was true, my voice was filthy salty. I can counter that. Somehow it was easier to talk this time, shored up in a bankside tavern drinking cheap sherry. Yes, of course I've been to Syracuse. And Venice. Yes. Tell me what the merchants wear there. I described it all. I told him about Castle Elsinore, where we delivered a pair of peacocks that later I heard tell froze to death in the cold grounds. And were you ever in a storm? Oh, yes, the roughest. Oh, my ship was shattered. We were picked up by a galleon who turned out to be benevolent plunderers. How did he know what of this I fabricated? And you plundered with them? They would approach a ship from behind the wind. I said, you won't appreciate how hard that is to do. He looked put out. Dame Fortune has an outrageous streak in her to turn favour when it pleases. Well, he said, she's a woman, isn't she? I went on, they had no muskets, no cannons, but more skilled marksmen you could never imagine. They used whale gut slings and bone arrows they'd file down. They'd aim for the skipper's heart or the first mate. That way, no damage was done. We walked late, and the evenings blurred into one. He blindfolded me and spun me, and I only knew where he'd led me when I smelled the sawdust and heard wood creak. And it reminded me so much of being in the underbelly of a ship, sailing through worlds, drifting into somnambulance in green mists, and waking up somewhere the words and dreams were different. The theatre, I said. We're in the theatre. No, he corrected me. We're in the Globe. As he unfastened the ribbon behind my head, his fingers were clumsy and nearly knocked my cap off, and later I found he'd left a smear of ink hardening in my hair. We were in the tiring house, and as soon as I clapped eyes on those rows of silk and lace and floor-length French velvet costumes, I saw what it was possible to become. He reached into the rack and wrestled out a thick cochineal brocade dress, stiffened into a flat waistband at the stomach, panniered at the hips. Try this. He saw me hesitate. Go on, you'll fit. It's meant for a boy. Can I try the bishop's robe instead? How coy could I sound, instead of terrified? He reached across to my brow, pressed his palm flat, then smoothed it. There was curiosity in his eyes. I felt for a moment like a pebble or trinket, like the ziraff he had looked at with mischief. I cannot imagine fatigue here, he said. A flaw, a wrinkle. I swallowed. All right, he said. The bishop's robe. He helped me into it, and his hands, his inky hands, lingered at my collar. And I burned. Then there was the time we rescued a bear. There was a pit across the way from the Globe. It was after a baiting, and the thing was half stuck through a gap in the fence, wheels on its paws and a broken screen. He hoisted me up over, you're a brave boy, to push from behind. With sticks to guard us, for the poor thing didn't know if we were friend or foe, we yanked and shoved it still on its chain, till its claws found purchase in the outer wood, its belly snuck through the fence, and pop! It was ours. What in the name of God and the devil, he said, am I to do with a bear? He examined its mainly scarred face. Its eyes were remarkably human. Put it in one of your plays. We tore along the bank of the river, from Southwark to Lambeth, hair streaming. I had the chain in one hand, and the bear pursued us. 6 months at sea. When I returned this time, the salt and the sun had left their mark, and I was both scrawny and done. He was there, staring. Every day he said he'd come. My hand was the first thing he touched. What do you smell of? I was ready not to hide any longer. Perfume, I said. Arabian perfume. When he met my eyes, it was with new understanding. I don't know whether the rooms we went to were his. There was another man there at first, sitting on the bed. They exchanged a few words until the man got up, selected a volume from the shelf, and closed the door behind him. I started with my shoes, slipped my feet free, then breeches, stockings, shirt, until I was in my shift, a vain silken piece I always wore right next to my body, to keep the scent close, to remind me every day that I am a woman. I took away my cap, the pins from my dense black curls. He said nothing, not even when I was bare-breasted in front of him. He had on a starched ruff that day. I remember he struggled to take it off. The rest of his finery was easy in comparison, slid away like sealskin. He was paler than me, much paler, and the ginger in his beard threaded down his body, now gold, now dark. I couldn't think of words to describe him, but he made me think of all the sweet things I had ever tasted, touched, or seen. An oyster, freed from its shell, apricots in hazy coats, damson flesh, a tall elk standing in the snow. Afterwards, he took up my shift and slipped it on, stretching the linen at his shoulders. I wore his stockings and the iced lace ruff, and we lay moulded by the threads of each other's fabric, bound. I went to his play, noted the reference to Elsinore, to slings and arrows, told him. He smiled, as if that were reward enough. It was only when we were casting off and I was back in my slops and jacket, sea-ready, steeled for a voyage to the Arctic, that the skipper said, "Don't see so much of Will these days." I kept my smile tight, a locket, locked in my heart. Still, I suppose his wife must want him some of the time, back home. Suppose she sees less of him than some of the sailors' moles. Oh yes, and his 3 bonny children too. Can't remember their names. My heart fell out of me then, pierced, down into the dockside grit, and I never picked it back up. When I look down upon that blank grey page that rocks in opposition to the ship, I think how desperate and beautiful and how strange it would be to extinguish into nothingness, melt into it like the elusive flame inside an emerald. Slings and arrows. But better to be at the bottom of this sea than floating on the sea of troubles we toss ourselves to back on land. I stare until I make a mirror. I see both a young boy and a dark lady, and my rage is not for the lie, the terrible lie he told, or the truth he didn't mention, or his double love, but for the things he took from me. Words objects, stories. Gave back nothing in return. Where am I in all the body of his work? I take off one shoe, then the other. Shoes that will forever link me to him in my mind. Unslip my shift from my shoulders and put it off through my shirt. The threads that took his odour and his heat. I stuff it tight into the toe of one shoe, bind both together with sea rope, and in the tongue of the other I leave a note. Love is such stuff as dreams are made of. I bind them and I throw them. And of course, I hope that they will float on currents back to him. But instead, they eddy, only for a second, then sink, pull down, spiralling until they are a speck of cloudy mist.